All right. Here we are live with Castledine. I noticed you and Andrew been doing this a little bit.
Just randomly, like we'll go when we got time. You know how it is, man. Like we'll look up and we find like this week. Right. I'm sure you're like me. We got nothing.
Well, actually today I was supposed to be filming. I was supposed to go over to Okmulgee, and we were going to film for Falcon Rods. And I'd moved everything aside. I had my kids taken care of, bus, pick up the whole nine. And cameraman texted me last night. And he's like, dude, the wind's supposed to blow 20 to 30. So can we do it next Monday? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So it got canceled. So I'd really already had everything set aside today to go do that. And then this kind of came up because of the wind blowing. But it is what it is. I'm supposed to go to do a deal with Falcon, their grand challenge that they have every year. I believe that's this coming weekend. And then there's also a Nichols up there on Sunday. So I think I told my wife, I was like, you might just jump in that with me. You don't need to drive to Grand, do you? Let me give you the laydown though. The lake right now. You don't
even want to know this. Listen.
What?
So McKay's got a soccer tournament this weekend in Dallas.
Ooh.
And I leave Sunday to Tulsa for a week in Tulsa. We're like 4 days in Tulsa with Strike King and we got some different people showing up. Yeah, I mean.
Well, here's the problem you're not going to like. So grand elevation, normal pool at Grand Lake is 742, and right now it's sitting at 753.
When that happened?
Yeah, just in the last week or so.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you can catch them, but probably not. I know.
Yeah, that's why I told my wife. I said, you ought to just jump in with me, and then that way, if we do catch them, we don't have to split any money. But because it's going to be a flipping deal. Probably, I say that it'll be coming down. They'll be catching them out there on the points with a big crankbait. I mean, it is May, dude. It's hot as it can be here. I mean, yesterday was 90 degrees.
We still had beds on Rayburn.
Really?
Now, not great. I mean, I wouldn't say that was by anywhere the dominating factor by any means this past weekend, but I mean, there were still fish on beds. I think they were quickly, like it was the last wave of them, but still Rayburn. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like it feels like ours still started late down here, like in March, but I mean, shoot. There's still some if it was normal.
Well, dude, I've seen it at Grand where like you think it's the tail end of the spawn, May's coming and May gets here and then we get that big flood and it's almost like it puts them in the mood again. They start feeling frisky and they move up with the water and it's like, oh, let's start this all over again. And they really do, dude. And I mean some big ones. I've been fishing thinking that I'm catching them and thinking I'm catching fish. And then I'm like, ooh. I see that big one and she's on a bed,
Well, so this is the best part. And this is always the argument I get in with people. And mine isn't a guess. Mine's never a guess. Mine is, I'm seeing it with my eyes. So I always tell people, everyone else goes off of fishing. And then you'll understand what I'm about to say. Is they're like, hey man, they're almost all done. Like I'm catching post spawners. And I'm like, yeah, because you're not that you're trying to, but you're fishing in whatever style you're doing is producing post-spawn fish. Like, so like, yeah, I'm out there, cranking and they're all out there. I'm like, well, the ones that are done are out there.
Yep.
But these other ones are still up here on beds. Yep. I see them. Yep. And so I always love how people go, they'll say the fish are doing this. Well, it's just because that's the way you're catching them. It's just a pattern. It doesn't mean that that's what's going on around the entire lake. So yeah, it's the one thing that I always like, I was catching, it took me a second. Remember I told you, I was like, hey man, I kind of got one little pattern figured out. I didn't get to practice much for this event. I was at Ross Barnett and then I went to
Texas Home before that.
My kid's game when I was coming back. And so I was only going to get 3 days because they moved the tournament up a day. I got a half a day and I had some issues with the boat. So I missed all of the next day and I got another half, like another 3/4 of a day. So I didn't get much practice, but the end of that first half day, I caught some and I started thinking about what was going on. I'm like, I was catching them on top water. I was like, those were pre-spawners. It didn't dawn on me that those were pre-spawners hanging out in front. I'll just say, like, there were some bushes and you could see inside the bushes and you could flip them up. You could flip them up and they were like, you could see the bottom. I mean, you see everything. But if you flipped up there where before you got there, you'd catch one. And I'm like, those were on beds. And I started catching these fish outside the bushes, like on nothing.
Right.
And I'm like, wait, there's no shad in there, man. Those were pre-spawners. And it was cool. And then, of course, they left very quickly because, I mean, they were probably there for a day and rolled up there and started.
You know, that's something that I've noticed on northern lakes primarily because they're clear. I have seen it at Amistad. I don't know that I could put 2 and 2 together back then, but I saw some really deep bed fish. And this really comes from being in Oklahoma where the water's stained. So like years ago, you know, and probably still a lot of local guys feel this way, but like in March, you start catching these giant bags in the back ends of these really good places on Lake Eufaula and Grand Lake, giant bags on a spinnerbait, 6 inches deep. And we always referred to those as pre-spawners. Dude, those fish weren't pre-spawners. Those fish were spawning. And it took me traveling the country to where I could see more clear water, where I'm like, them fish were not pre-spawners. They were spawning. But anyway, as the spawn progresses, they spawn deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. Well,
and further out.
And further out.
When I mean about further out, Holman's like, did you notice when Holman said back of the creeks? We're saying further out.
Right.
Creeks, main lake.
Yeah, main lake, and then all the way down the lake if it's a big enough reservoir. And I got to wondering about these fish that I started seeing in these places that were, 10, 12 foot deep, and they're on beds. I mean, I could see them. They are
23 foot at Amistad. Yeah.
So I saw them in 20 plus in Amistad. That's right. That's where I said I'd seen it. But I don't know that I could put 2 and 2 together because I remember catching a bedfish that was in 23 foot of water because I could see it on my graph and I could see the fish down there and I caught it. But I couldn't relate because I can't tell you what time of year that was. So I don't know how far along that was. But anyway, back to my analogy of this is I got to wondering how many times are we sitting out there on those secondary points in Oklahoma in May thinking that we're catching post spawners coming out and they've got bloody tails and they may very well have been sitting on a nest. You know what I mean?
So Amistad. So when we first went to Amistad, I think it was maybe it was the first time. I've been to Amistad like once or twice and I didn't get to practice. But when Amistad was in its heyday, I was down there and I was sight fishing. I was sight fishing, right? And that's all I was going to do for like 6 days. And that's all I did. And right before but it was blowing. And this is what I learned about certain places. Like Amistad's one of these places. I'm sure Oklahoma can be like this at times, right? Certain places around the country. I was like, man, it's been blowing for 6 days at Amistad.
Right.
The tournament's going to start tomorrow or the next day. It's going to stop blowing, right? I mean, it's blown this long. There's no way it's going to blow for 10 days, 12 days straight. Yeah. I totally did not. That's Amistad. It can do that. Like our lakes won't do that. Like it'll have fluctuations of wind where I'm from. So about the day before the tournament, I was going, I better figure out how to catch a fish fishing. Well, it blew worse during the tournament, but I ended up, and man, it wasn't a great, when I say it wasn't a great tournament, I smoked on 20 something pounds, lost fish, broke off fish. I was in my old boat. I was taking waves over the front of the boat. I was in the middle and I had like these 3 points that were phenomenal. I bring this up because listen, so I've been back to Amistad when it was dead calm, slick. And like you said, when you get out there and it's right, 23 foot of water. Yep. I mean, I'm looking down and you get right over them. I mean, you just drop down on them because you can't even hardly cast at them.
You can't hardly hit them dropping it because it swirls so much going down. It's hard to get it on a bed.
Right. So, but they'll be in the, and if you find grass out there, like it'll be growing up like a foot maybe. So you'll see them on points or ditches. It doesn't matter what it is. And I was like, man, they're deep. Well, then that tournament, there was like 3 big points, and I was Carolina rigging.
Mm-hmm.
And so usually when you're on a point on most lakes, when you throw out there, like now, of course, we'll spot lock, right? And there's a cast. And especially post-spawn fish, right? And even pre-spawn fish. It's usually they're feeding, right?
Mm-hmm.
On that cat. Well, I remember I'd be like, I'd throw, catch one, catch one, catch one, catch one. But I was still catching a bunch, but it wasn't like I could throw in the same spot again. And like I said, there's 5 footers. I mean, you're just, everything's going on, but I look back 100%. Because it was only like 17, 18 foot up on top with a little bit of inside. There's an inside grass line because the grass was all in like 20 to like 25. You catch some of the grass, but most of them were right on that inside grass line. I'm like, those were spawners I was catching because they were all big.
Yeah.
And it was going, and it just made too much sense at the time. I mean, now it does, but you're 100% right.
Right. And I think the size of the fish is what kind of gives it away. That's why I feel like those giant bags that came in Oklahoma in March and those backwater places were they're spawners because they're too damn big. They're just too big. Those are giant females. Like I fished all around the country and I haven't seen that many population of that many giant fish together unless the spawn. That's it.
Here's the other thing. I don't care if you bring up Oklahoma too. In Grand Lake, because everyone from Oklahoma wants to fish this deep, right?
Yeah, right.
Because it works. But even right now, like after they spawn, they don't hang out this deep.
Right.
They want to roll.
Right.
Most big ones they don't mind being up shallow. Don't get me wrong. They don't necessarily always want to be up there. It's like a 6-pounder doesn't go, let me go to the very back of this creek with a foot or 2 foot of water in it and hang out underneath this boat dock. They're there because they know they're about to either like right on the verge or it's right there. So yeah, they'll get back up there in the fall sometimes because it's the water. I think it's mainly to do, it's not food. Well, it's food to a degree, but it's because the water gets hot and the oxygen level gets actually higher in the water column. So they get in a higher water column. That could be in 30 foot and they're hanging out in 2 foot, or they're in 2 foot. Because the water column, the water oxygen level is better. But this brings up, I want to bring this up because we've both been at Ross Barnett.
Yep.
And, I don't know what you were doing on day 1, like out there throwing at freaking leaves floating around or whatever. But on day 2, you go out there and catch like the biggest bag of the event.
Yeah.
But before that event, but we got some theories going on this event. And there's one thing I can't figure out, but bring up that spawning because you flip most of the time in practice. And I did not.
Yeah.
And I went flipping the last day for 10 minutes because I knew everyone was doing it. I didn't want to do it. I knew it was going to happen, but I went and did it, got one bite. I'll show it on video. And I'm like, I didn't even set the hook. It was one of those like, whatever, and big one, just giant. And I'm going, So we talked about the fish running off and you're like, Todd, I think they're still on beds, like big time. You still believe that?
Yes. I think that's how the tournament was. I don't know if it was won that way, but that was what I saw. And I didn't have the biggest bag of the event, but the biggest bag of day 2.
No. I'm sorry. Biggest bag of day 2.
Yep. And, some light bulbs went off for me that day. And that's really what I realized. I had flipped and, winded and done all kinds of stuff during practice, but flipping was primarily what I'd done. But I just felt like I've done it enough. I could tell that those stupid things were spawning. And anyway, the first day or so of it was just exactly what you and I had talked about. There's a million boats up and down the same stretches. And I had a stretch that, this is a cool story. I had a stretch that actually had my biggest bite out of in practice. But I didn't get many bites in there, but I did have the biggest. I mean, like it was like a 5.5 pounder, maybe a 6. It was big. And I had seen the fish. I did actually catch the fish, but the way that she ate was on some of those grass mats, where primarily most of what I felt strong about were those reeds. But this area had no reeds in it whatsoever. It was all just grass mats. Anyway, I decided to go there on day 2 about 11 o'clock in the morning because everything's just been smoked. It's just burnt toast after everybody's been through it for 2 days. And it's just so much pressure. And I figured, honestly, Todd, just like you would think, it's been smoked too, by other anglers doing different things. And maybe it had, I don't know, but I go there and there's no one in there at the time. And so I get fiddling around in there and I really don't understand what's going on with these mats because
This
I
is
caught
day
this
two.
fish off the side of this
This is
mat.
day two, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I caught this fish in practice off the edge, like right on the edge, like right. That's how I saw it, or that's how I saw the fish. I had my bait, it was, kind of hung up on the edge of it and I'm shaking it. She comes up and eats it just like she would have eaten a frog. Right. And I saw how big she was because she was right next to the boat. She comes up and she eats it, and I shake her off anyway. So I go through here in the tournament and I'm about in the same area, ballparkish, and I decide the only way to attack this really is just do it the same way you did it in practice. So I pick up my flipping stick with my 1/4 ounce weight. And what this stuff looks like is it looks like something that somebody would punch or frog, that's what it looks like. And as a matter of fact, my coiner was just punching like crazy behind me, but I hadn't had much success doing that in practice because I'd punched a bunch of that stuff. And there's a bunch of this stuff in this place. Anyway, I'm going down through there and I flip the edge and I hadn't been in there very long and my line starts moving off and I set the hook and it comes up, and of course, when you've been catching 2-pounders, it looks like, a 12. And my coiner starts getting real excited about how big it is. And I get it in the boat. It's a big fish. I mean, it's a 7-pounder and she's long, big head. But as I put that fish in the box and I stood up, I realized that other big fish that I'd seen in practice was literally right behind me, like 10 foot from where that fish was. So now I'm thinking, there's some big fish in here, exactly what are they doing? And actually live scope's kind of what gave it to me. I started really looking at those mats and they're really thick. It's not like you've got one stem that grows up and then goes to the surface and then it all flutters out. That's not how they're built. It's a whole bunch of that. So what you see on top is really what's down underneath. They were using it the same way they were using those reed lines, that hard edge to spawn up against. So now I'm like, I'm not fishing anything but the edge of it. And then I got to looking at that little area where this giant comes from right behind me. And here I'm actually sitting in a ditch. Now it's only like a 1 foot deeper than it is everywhere else, but it's a foot deep depression. I mean, it's a drain. So now I just start focusing on this drain. And make a long story short, they weren't just in the drain. They were up on the hill too, in the flat. I saw one move, flipped over there, takes off 100 miles an hour. I saw it the second I flipped because I'd seen it move before I made the flip. I caught that fish. I missed 2 or 3 more because of the way that they're biting. End up going with the swim jig for a while, catch another big one, lose another big one. But the swim jig thing, even with that, I still, there was another competitor, 2 competitors try to come in there in the pocket that I was in after I'd been in there for about an hour. I didn't really want either one of them in there, but I don't know who's been in there and who hadn't. So I just keep my mouth shut and I'm fishing. But one of them's the guy that finished second in the event. And he looks like you with a swim jig in his hand. I mean, he's literally got the trolling motor on about close to high. He's throwing that thing 1,000 miles in distance of cast, and he's just whining as fast as he can. Well, I'm in here just picking this thing apart, flipping, and I've only been in here for an hour. And this is a pretty good area. It's about the size of a football field. And he comes down one side. And I'm like, well, I can't let him smoke the entire thing, while I sit here and flip. So I pick up a swim jig and I go down my side. He goes down his side and he gets about 3/4 back. And I just stop and start fishing in the middle. But what I started doing different was like I would throw, these were islands of this stuff. And I would throw down the sides more, like instead of just making long casts, you would come over the top of some of it, off the edge of some of it. I would try to create casts that would just come right down the edges, say they were spawning on the side of it. And that's how I ended up catching a couple more big ones. But they were spawning, dude. There's no doubt about it.
So me and Hallman, we room together, we do all that stuff, but we weren't rooming together on this one, so we weren't really talking. Well, when I first got down there, everyone talked about how muddy it was. And I got down there like very little time left on day one. So I just put in where we were taking off of just to figure out. And I go in this one little cut and I'm going down and I look to my left and there's a fish on the bed. Now, granted, this fish is this big. I don't know if y'all know, that's about 10 inches. And when I say it's that, because it's this deep.
Yep.
I mean, because it's so small, and I'm like, huh. And I'm looking at that grass, you're talking about, and I'm throwing my swim jig. Like that's what I literally started with my swim jig. And I'm like, huh. And I throw up there down this bank with that grass. And I'm like, same thing. And I just boil. And I'm like, everyone's talking about how hard it is. I shake that one off, go around, shake another one off. There wasn't a lot of that grass left where the section of the lake I was in at the time, but I ended up getting some bites. Day 2 of practice, I did whatever, and I finally got around more of that grass. And it was because Holman made a point that said on day 2, did you tell your coingler like Todd's crushing on him?
Yes. Yeah. As soon as I realized that swim jig would work down the sides of those things, I actually told him that. I was like, because I had a pretty good bag, and I was like, Castledine has got to be crushing on them right now.
So
also, I knew you were in the same area of the lake as me because I'd seen you a lot during practice and during the event.
And this is the hard part about it. And I can bring this up specifically to you because you'll understand this, because you know the entire area where you're at. And I was doing some other things too as backup, and the backup saved me. It wasn't as good as it was in practice, but it definitely saved me. And I purposely practiced that way. But I got on that swim jig deal, and it was like, that's why when I told you I didn't flip, didn't have to flip. Right. I'm over there swim jigging like crazy, frogging a little bit, but I knew the frog, once again, wasn't fast enough, and you don't miss them on the swim jig. Like they never missed it.
Right.
And I'm going down this deal, and I'm like, I don't care if it's the ditch on the flat, wherever it is. Mm-hmm. I've got them, and I'm getting like 40 bites a day. And I'm going, it's on. Let everyone flip. I was like, man, I'll flip at the end of day 1, and only because I think I'm going to have them, and I'll just go beat up everyone else's flipping fish. What I mean by that is like at that point, I don't have to slow down any. I can just go flip and just beat up and they'll be all in trouble on day 2, and I'll just be able to do this. So, but I'm boat 1, guys. I drew boat 1, and I was like, well, I don't really have, since I'm covering area, I don't have this like giant area that's better than the rest. I kind of do, but there's a reason I say boat 1. So I'm the first one. Like even Hank Weldon was like, hey, Todd, you got the whole lake to yourself for 19 seconds. That's what he texted me. He's like, get ready. I'm like, yeah. So I get in there and I get it. I get this one section. I was on the phone with you. Remember when I was like, there's another bite. Hey, there's another bite. Yeah. Well, I was doing the same thing, and it was every isolated piece of cover. It's like, eats it. And I'm like, I'll start in there because I left so much of that alone. And there was a ditch, there was an outside, there was a pocket. Like I could hit the ditch, the opening of the pocket and come out the other side and hit. I think I can hit all that within 15 minutes, 20 minutes, have a limit easily. Who knows? And get an idea. But what we haven't talked about is the fact that they were dropping that lake. They pulled on that lake.
Yeah, they did.
And they pulled on it for like 3 or 4 days. Mm-hmm. And when I got out there, this is important because when I got there, of course, I'm the first one there.
Right.
And like second cast, one eats it, tries to eat it, and misses it. And I set the hook, no pinchers. And I'm like, yeah, that wasn't a big one. So I keep going. And all of a sudden my trolling motor's hitting bottom. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, we knew it might, but I'm looking at that grass, and that grass looks different. You can just tell it's like more matted. Mm-hmm. Can't throw over it as great. And I was throwing over it because there'd be holes in it, but like Holman, definitely the sides of it. Mm-hmm. And I go through there and I look back, and I'm just dirt everywhere and mud. And I'm like, this ain't good. I thought I would have easily 5 in the first 5 minutes. And I have had one bite, and it was a little one, and it missed it. So it's like they missed it. It's small, and I'm getting no bites, everything. And I go through that whole area, and I go, straight up, this is what happens in tournaments. Like, I'm used to this. I told Blake, who I'm staying with, I'm like, I promise you, because he was talking about these opens. I'm like, you got your mentality, it has to be different. And because things will, whatever you did in practice, it will change in this tournament. He's like, I don't understand. I'm like, you will. We've done enough of them, right, Holman? Mm-hmm. Whatever you do, you're going to have to adjust so much. It'll blow your mind, and you will end up almost catching them a different way than you did in practice. Happens every time we do good. When we do good, that's usually what happens. Right. When we do bad, it's because we don't adjust.
That's correct.
So I'm in there within 45 minutes. I have pretty much changed the entire way I look at this tournament, because I go, I could do this for the rest of the day. and I'm going to get killed. Now, someone on here is going to be like, well, didn't Hallman do it on day 2? Yes. Here's what but me and Hallman saw each other on day 1.
Yep.
We were both struggling. This area we're in is huge. We're talking 3, 4, 5 miles long. And it kind of all resembles the same thing to a degree. So what we couldn't figure, even after the event, and Hallman will attest to this, why that one little area Hallman was in, they didn't leave. Like they didn't leave that shallow water compared to everywhere else. Wouldn't you agree? They left that everywhere else. When we say left, there's one here, one there. But for the most part, the how it was in practice everywhere translated only to this one little area. And I couldn't to this day tell you why that is. And I'm sure Hallman, I'm sure you couldn't. You couldn't.
I'm not for sure that they didn't come in there spawning. I'm not for sure that some of those fish may not have been there. They were on their way.
Maybe so.
And on day 2 of the tournament. Now I do know this. This is
But
one
why,
big thing.
But why only there?
Okay, well, listen to this analogy. Now think about this, because I do think this was another big part of the puzzle. If you went swim jigging, let's say that they really locked down more on the beds as we were there. Okay. I feel like that the swim jig bite was so good in the afternoon. I felt like it was not only the flipping bite, the swim bait or the swim jig bite, but I felt like flipping bite was better too for bigger fish. I think that as the day progressed and warmed up and the sun got up, I think that those females got closer and closer, more protective and became more aggressive around that bed than they would be in the morning. So like in the morning, you're going out there and we're thinking, May, shad spawn, they're not biting it. Like I'm not getting bit. And so a lot of guys put that down. And I think as the day progresses and gets warmer, I think those fish became more aggressive. Now I'm specifically talking about during the event. And I think it was a stronger bite later in the day than it was early in the day.
I would always check it. I'm telling you, those fish, because even the flippers around us, because me and you fit like that giant area.
Well, you came up to me. I started right where you saw me. Now I was like about 186 or something.
Yeah, but I started right.
And you came in and you told me, you said, hey, I started right where you are and it's not going on. The water has fallen and it's changed. Like, what are we going to do? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, it's mud. They didn't all leave, but you were right, dude. Like it was not the same as what it had been. But did you start basically right there on that same stretch that I was sitting?
Yeah, right. So you know how there was reeds on the outside and then there was the grass on the inside and stuff?
Mm-hmm. Did you go inside that? Did you go inside that pocket and go all through that?
I went through there. My first keeper, when you had crossed that other cut where the boat docks are, like I had gone down that stretch too. And that was where I caught one of my keepers. What bothered me is I was catching them all in the grass.
Yeah.
Like when I went through there in practice, I'm not trying to dissect everything. I just want to see where the most bites are. Because I'm not really worried about that because I know things will change. So the next day when I went through there, I stopped getting bit. And I'm like, all right. So I went up to the reeds, which is even shallower. And I was throwing in between the reeds and the grass with a swim jig. I caught one, caught a short one and missed one. And all of them were 13 to 14 inches. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting here going, I'm not getting like, you threw that swim jig enough. When you saw one, I mean, the hole, it just boils like that. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm not saying they were 5-pounders, but they were 2 to 4-pounders. And I'm like, okay, once again, we're starting to see all small fish show up. They're not hanging out on the scrap. Like these are little, just resident little bitty 14-inch fish. These aren't what was in here. But like I said, but I did that from there all the way to the back. Like when I say they left, obviously you could still catch some flipping, but I watched guys catch them flipping, small ones. I mean, I would see guys catch a flipping fish, throw it back, flipping fish, throw it back. And I'm like, that's not what you were getting bit in practice either. No. So the big ones had left. I personally still think it was a water level deal. I don't see how all of them quit spawning at the same time. What I can't figure out is why back there, I mean, it's spawning fish, right? Like they move in and out of pockets like crazy. So I do agree with you, but it's weird how it was still shallow where you were. And I don't specifically know.
When you're catching 7-pounders on a flip, that's pretty easy for anybody to make. middle of a day 2
They
tournament. with
weren't
that many
there 2
boats,
days ago.
like either they haven't been found or they weren't there. Like
They weren't
'cause
there
would
2
have
days
been.
ago. And that's the only thing is that like I could have like drove my head into the ground doing that same thing. And if I'd have just never stopped, I probably would have eventually rolled back to that little section you were at because it wasn't a big section. I'd fish all the sections around there, but I quit doing it in practice because I'm like, me and you are the same way. Once you start getting bit flipping, right, you can look at reeds and go,
Yes,
there. Right. I did it for 10 minutes, caught one 6-pounder and go, those are the reeds I need. I know everything I need to know about flipping with one fish. I had already done enough of the swim jig that I could see it. This is all I'm going to do in the tournament. But when you go do it for an hour, and like I said, I was boat 1, I knew it wasn't pressure because I'm sure guys were rolling in behind.
It still somewhat had to roll though, because LeBrun straight up whooped our ass, dude. And now I'm not saying he wasn't flipping and doing something earlier in the day. Maybe he was, but that dude was catching them.
Correct, but not where we all were. Like for whatever reason, certain sections of that place they left and why they did in others. And I didn't cover the entire
I think the section that I saw you honestly just had way too much boat pressure. I mean, I felt that way day 1. I felt that way day 2.
I went in there and I purposely ended my practice around there and had 2 bites in like a couple minutes and I left. I'm like, this will be fine. Not to win it, but I mean, I'll go in here and catch some fish because once I realized I was boat 1, I'm like, I'll be all right. Because I wasn't planning on going there. I wasn't planning on doing any of that stuff because I had that other way of catching them. I'm like, well, let me just run in there for an hour, catch some, and I can slow down in this other place. And it didn't happen.
Yeah.
It was an interesting event, though. It really was.
It was. The muddy water helps there. It helped keep them shallow, even though the water fell quite a bit. And maybe they just adjusted to it. And we're talking about it fell like 3 inches, which was a lot for that place, maybe 4. But
over 3 days or overnight?
I think it fell quite a bit over the last 2 days of practice that we were there.
Yeah,
they shut the water off. So the
6 to
guys
8
up in the river were talking about fishing a lot of current, and they had current related fish, and the water got shut off, and there was no more current, and that really changed their tournaments for them up there. I've been told by numerous guys up there that said if it would have kept rolling the current, you would have seen those guys up there do a whole lot more than what they did. Where the part of the lake that you and I were in, there wasn't current.
No, it was. I think 6 to 8 inches would be fair to say over 3 days, and I think because I remember talking to even Blake and some things, and we're like, he goes, I didn't see a stump the entire time, and then on day 1, I'm seeing stumps out of the water, right? I mean, those I started seeing them too. Like there was no stumps out of the water where we were at, and all of a sudden they started popping up, and I'm like, and like I said, is it a big deal? It's a big deal when the deepest fish you catch is in 2 foot.
Yeah, it's a big
like
deal.
If that's the deepest you catch one in, 6
I don't know that I caught one out of 2 foot the whole time I was there in
practice
in tournament.
Those ditches that were in like 3 and 4 foot. Yeah. Every once in a while there'd be a piece of grass or something. I mean, it would be this big.
Yeah.
And if there was just a stick or something, I could just throw that someone and like every isolated anything, they bite it on it. And I'm like, all right, cool. Those fish, I can see those as pressure because boats were usually going over those. But yeah, I like that play. Like, we kind of dogged it because of where it's. We never dogged the lake. I actually like Ross Barnett. I think it's pretty cool. And if anyone ever wants to know where to stay and do all that stuff, man, like there's definitely sections of that place to stay at where it is like the drive there, everything is awesome. I'm just being honest. And it was, people were really nice there. Like the on the lake that lived there, they were great. Got to watch them though. They'll I had one shoot a gator not too far from me. I don't think that's legal.
That is one thing I noticed about the place, because I started in the marina, the boat canal or whatever
they got them in marinas.
Dude, those people have houses and everything, but in the marinas, they are the most fisherman-friendly group of people. Because like when I first got there and I saw that place and all those nice homes up and down through there and all those docks, I was like, it's going to take about 2 docks and an owner's going to be out here cussing me for fishing their dock. Not one time. They come out, they ask questions about where you're
Not
from. They must fish. The locals must fish those docks 24/7. And I
Well, they
noticed the
got-
crappie fishermen are in there. Everybody's in there dobbing around. So
well, they got gators too. So I mean, like
it's a pontoon boat lake. It's not many. There's a few houseboats and stuff, but you don't see like the big yachts. The yachts are where
No.
you always get somebody yelling at you. But yeah, it was a cool place. I enjoyed it. We're kind of halfway through the season, or somewhat halfway. We've done four of 9, so we've got one more. I guess will be the actual halfway point.
That's a Texoma lake.
It is.
Right. And what we mean by that, if y'all heard me and Holman talk about Texoma is the most awesome lake to go to 4 days before an event. Like you show up there day one, and I mean, whatever looks good, you throw over there and you catch them. Dude,
I told a lot of people that. I was like, dude, this is going to be Texoma. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, you see a piece of cover, you throw by it, you get bit. But guess what?
And it might be
on tournament day.
And it might be it's one of those lakes you throw over there and it's a big one that bite. Like it's like, oh, I wonder, ding, ding. You're like, I have no big deal. It ain't no 2-pounder. It's a 6-pounder sometimes. You're like, where'd this thing come from? Yeah. Like, no, they're there.
That was the other thing that I enjoyed about that lake, even though I didn't have a very good first day. And you as well, with the weight that you had, like it was very easy. Cause like to do the math, you're like, okay, it's going to take 13 pounds or 12 pounds or 14 pounds. Dude, you were going to jump this huge jump just by catching a 13, 14, 15 pound bag. And we're talking about a lake that's got a ton of 5 to 6 pounders in it. I mean, and bigger. Like this is very doable. This is just a couple of bites. And I like those kind of tournaments where, we go some places and after day one, if you don't catch them, you're out of it. You know what I mean? Because
not this place.
Not this place at all. And I like that where you can stumble, but you can come back. Texoma is kind of the same way in the same aspect where that 12-pound mark is kind of par, but a 17, 18, 20-pound bag is out there and it moves you so far in the field. I like lakes like that. I really do. And I like that about Ross Barnett. That was cool. And it's even got big. It's got a lot of big fish in it.
It's got big one. Like, so, I had a pretty decent one every day, but on day one, like my video is going to be, it's even hard for me to go back and watch. Like I said, I was thinking about all year long. I mean, I probably fished 15, 18 tournaments this year. I don't remember losing a fish that mattered. And I lost 2 of them doing something that like, it's kind of my bread and butter. And I mean, I got them on video, like it shows them. And I'm like, I was kind of doing the math going, because, we both weigh in even on day one. I got a lot of stuff that happened on day one. I mean, it was like the bittersweet day for me because of what happened. I mean, I don't want to give it away, but like, I was pretty in bad shape going up to the very last second. Anyways, but yeah, I lost 2 big ones that pretty much, I think after day 2 puts me in the top 3.
And that was I lost some big ones too, both days. And I mean, I'm talking like an abnormal amount, like you say, doing our bread and butter. And,
but but I wanted to explain to everyone why.
I felt like a lot of it was because they were spawning. I really did. I felt like a lot of it was the spawn on top of the water falling and the pressure. And you combine all 3 of those things together and it just makes a fish that's not just sitting there ready to kill anything that comes by. They're on high alert.
I want to bring this up. So me and Hallman have, we get a lot, even when I was with Falcon, right? Me and Hallman had a lot of viewpoints on rods. We still do. It doesn't mean we throw the same rod all the time. That's not it either. But our viewpoint is the same, is when we choose a rod, reel setup and all that stuff, what we're trying to do is figure out how to catch those fish, the ones we're talking about. Not the tournament's never won off the 2-pounders. It's won off the 7-pounder he caught or the 5-pounder or the things that make the difference. And there's usually a reason why people lose those. And we know those reasons. We can't always stop those reasons, but we at least know what's going on. And there's a specific reason on lakes like this. And it's not shallow fish as opposed to a fish being in 2 foot and you're sitting in 5. It's a fish sitting in 2 foot and it's still 2 foot, 30 yards away. They are the hardest, in my opinion, fish to catch because I don't care if it's a frog, swim jig, flipping. When you flip up in there and you set the hook, most of the time on 99% of most fish people catch, You set the hook and they stay in the general area of where you're at.
Yep.
And they kind of jump and do this thing.
Right.
Holman will test that. When you're in that kind of deal, they don't do that. They, wherever you catch them, it's the skyrocket left or right.
Yep.
And you could have a 20-to-1 reel and you can't catch up. And so when you hear us talk about going, what gear ratio, you always hear us go, I want the highest gear ratio because I'm trying to catch up to those fish. I want my rod maybe stiffer because it's hard. Like, or when I say stiffer, like you want a rod that's bigger, longer, because if it gets a little bit of slack in your line, you're trying to reel. There's a big deal with that. And so I would suggest, and I'm not saying suggest listen to me. I made a video about the other day, but even on Holman, he said he was about to go do this video with Falcon. Maybe he brings that up because it is a big deal on how to catch those.
So exactly to your point, and I came home kicking myself about this. There's no doubt in my mind. I'm not saying that I land every flipping fish that I missed, but I bet I land half of them. And it's a rule of thumb that I've known forever. And I still went against the grain. I went against what I should have been doing there. And it's as simple as flipping fluorocarbon or flipping braid. And I was flipping fluorocarbon beginning of practice because that's just what was on the flipping stick at the time that was on my deck. I've got a flipping stick in my rod box. It's got braid on it. All I got to do is sit down and reach and pull it out, put a BFE on it. I'm golden. I didn't do it. And I promise you it makes a difference. Promise you it makes a difference in the fish that I lost because, it was 4 to 5 fish each day. Some of them I can't do anything about. One of them was on a swim jig, a big one. She just didn't get it. I mean, there's nothing I can do about that. I've already got that on braid. I've got it on the right rod. I hit it right on time. I turned her sideways. She pulls loose. But that flipping deal, like you say, they're coming out of there like a rocket. A lot of times at you, and it doesn't matter if you've got a 10-to-1 gear ratio, you're not keeping up.
And I lost mine on a frog. I'll be honest. And every year I have learned. So I have some big opinions on frog fishing as much as I do it. Right. I always think people don't use a heavy enough rod. And I'm not saying a broomstick. I'm just saying there's a rod that I don't think they have enough backbone on.
I agree with that.
And I don't think near people set the hook hard enough. I've always said in any of my videos, I tell you, I try to do 3 things. I try to break the line, the rod, and the reel on every hook set. I try to break them all. And I've done that, and I broke tons of rods and reels until I figured out, I promise you, my philosophy is this: I find a rod and a reel that I can't break, and that's what I use. So I've got Super Dude 300s. I still throw an old school Falcon rod. I'm getting loose to make one, but I can't break this thing. Mm-hmm. Everything's set up perfect for me to jack them as hard as I can. But what I'll say is the one thing I think I need more practice on than any, like starting the year, because that hook set's so different. It's so violent and so hard and so whatever that from like October to March, I'm not doing that. And so I get accustomed to I still set the hook hard, but it's not the same, because normally in most of my hook sets are like this. Frog is like this with body movement, and like I'll move back even a step or 2 back. I do a lot more stuff and I forget it. Well, on day 1, the first one, and I shook off a big one there in practice, and I hadn't set the hook yet all day long, and I shook them off all in practice. Right. So I'm not setting the hook.
That's another thing I noticed that happens to me. We shake fish off all through practice, and then tournament comes, and it's almost like, dude, I have actually caught myself almost shaking a fish off because you're just in that routine.
Right. So it's the first frog fish I have all day, and I stick it. And when I do, instantly, in your head, when you stick it, you're like you can hear it, right? That rod go, like you can just feel it all, and there's nothing left. And I go, and I'm reeling, and I got her, and I'm like, I didn't get her. And I'm reeling her, and she's jetting towards me and I'm like, and I'm just reeling, and she jumps, and I'm like, she made it. She jumps again. I'm like, okay, well, now I got her. Like, she's jumped twice and I didn't lose her because I know this is my fault. I didn't stick her all the way. And I'm like, she runs at the boat. She goes to jump. And I was just going to, and I went to pop her. I got her head just right out of the water. Just turned it just like that. It goes, boop. comes off. And I go, yep. And I don't think trying to lip her is any better. Like I'm not lipping a 4 to 5 pounder. Like I can boat flip those.
Right.
And I go, golly. And when I lose the second one, I thought I did the second one the same way. I went back, watched the video. I think that was just bad luck. But on the next day, don't lose any. Big ones eat. And I'm like, yeah, I'm so much calmer throughout the deal. And I crush every one of them. And I'm going, yep, all that shaking off and everything. That first one cost me. It cost me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I've been guilty of that too, dude. I have. Like, you actually think to yourself, my God, I spent all that time shaking and now I can't even set the hook.
Yeah. The best thing I can do, like, so, and after a term like this, I'll go frog fishing and I don't even notice it. Like, I remember at Choke, we did it. And the first one I lost and I go, you know, and then the second one, I flip it in, it comes off in the boat. I'm like, what? And then all of a sudden the next 15, I don't lose. Every one of them's just stuck. And I'm like, you just don't see yourself. I see myself like getting in that rhythm, but sometimes you get out of that rhythm. And like I said, especially in March and April, like when you first start doing it. Now in the summertime, dude, I got bruises, right? I mean, I look like I got beat up by somebody. That's what I want though.
Yep. I love frog fishing, dude. We don't have it as good as you guys have got it, but it definitely has its moments here too. It definitely has its moments for sure.
I caught a big one. I caught my biggest one on day 2 at Rayburn on it. The frog fishing just wasn't. There's a lot of people caught them on a frog. I look at frog fishing as more of a pattern, not a randomly going down the bank. And I just never figured it out until day 2. I figured out a little bit of a pattern and actually went and ran it. I didn't get much practice, right? And I finally got it in an area, and I didn't catch a lot, but I think I weighed in 3 of my fish on it. Not saying I did phenomenal in the event. I'd have been nice to know that was, I could have run this pattern a little bit more. I could have ran it. I just didn't see it at the time.
Who you got at home with you today?
Michael's at home, man. He wasn't. We had a long weekend. We hung out with Russell. Got home late. He wasn't feeling good. He wasn't feeling good last night.
And now he's feeling good.
Come here.
Now he's feeling good.
Well, he woke up. Brittany goes like, "Can he stay home with you today?" I'm like, "I guess." And say hi to Holman.
Hi.
What's up, man? What are you
he's
doing?
He went swimming a lot yesterday. He got
yeah.
He's got a lot of issues going on.
Little tadpole.
But he was man, and I'll get a picture of you holding that big old snake, huh? Russell caught a big old rat snake. Boy, he had it all out there holding it.
Where did y'all see Russell?
At his house.
Oh, y'all went down to Conroe?
Yeah.
Wow. Cool.
So Mother's Day, and my mom was down there, so we hung out with him. So
cool.
But
well, all right, dude, let's wrap this thing up. Appreciate
right.
everybody being here. Todd Castledine, YouTube. If you hadn't found him, I'm sure most of y'all watching are pretty aware of all of our stuff. If not, it's the first time you've been here, go check out Todd. It is Castledine Fishing, right?
Yep.
And we got all the other social media platforms available. So go check us out. And Todd's new controversial video, it's already hit 50,000 views.
Don't say controversial. It's not controversial. It's not.
He's having it out with high school kids. Picking on high school kids. All right. Yeah. Till next time, man. We out of here.
All right. See you, man.
Mm-hmm.